Now are we on? Yeah, we're on. This is kind of some interesting stuff up here. I don't want to mess up your... So a couple of things. One, thank you all for coming. We had a great program. God, this is pretty bright. Last week with Dave Lieber. We're going to have another great program, of course, tonight with Nancy Ashley. And if you didn't have dinner, I mean, gas is $5. There's less tissue on the roll of toilet paper. There are less chips in the package. But dinner here is still $13. And it was really good. It was really good last week, and it was really good tonight. So if you haven't done it, you maybe ought to try it. Now, the second thing, before I turn it over to Trissy Osborne, is that, you know, I know most of you all are probably parents, maybe some grandparents. I'm not. But I sort of feel like I kind of know how to act a little bit. So today, my business has changed. I don't really have a place that I'm at all day long, so I'm kind of moving around, flitting around, doing all this different stuff in the rug business. And it was kind of warm today, so I just decided to put on a pair of shorts. I had 2 appointments, one with a designer who happens to be my mother and her client, and I actually think I look pretty spiffy. But I met her and her client, and I was stopped somewhere else, and I was heading home, and my phone rang. And of course, my mother is one of the few people that doesn't have, her phone number doesn't come up on the phone. So when I see no caller ID, I either think it's my mother or somebody trying to sell me something. And I answer the phone, hello. And the next thing I get is, you're not going to wear those shorts tonight, are you, to the church? I said, well, why are you even asking me that question? I actually had thought about doing it, but then, even after 66 years, when your mother tells you not to do something, I guess you just don't do it. But I'm not going to say that when it gets to be 100, 102, 103 degrees here in the next few weeks that I might not show up with shorts. So just be prepared. And you too, be prepared. Having said that, again, I'm glad you're here. We're glad you're here. And I'm going to turn this microphone over to Trissy, who will welcome us, and then give it to Richard to introduce Nancy. So you guys have a great time.
Welcome, everyone. It's so good to see you. I am so happy we're back in person. We said that last week, but we'll probably say it every week because we're so glad we're back in person. I asked David what it was like having Jane for a mom, and he said, I'm speechless. And I think that says it all because Jane is wonderful, and we love this Rejebian series. But I'm Trissy Osborne. I am on staff here. I am, as of this week, back in pastoral care, and I run a program called Journey Ministry, which is a dementia respite program. And it's probably, other than being a mom, one of the most rewarding things I will ever do in my life. So I do Journey Ministry, Stephen Ministry, and some other pastoral care things. But y'all don't really want to hear about that because y'all want to hear Nancy tonight. So I ask that we bow. I'll say a brief prayer. Father, we thank you so much for this series, just the fellowship that comes with it, learning new things, and being in your presence here at the church. We pray you'll bless this evening. We thank you for the delicious food, especially the chocolate cake. And thank you that we can just be together again in person. So please bless this time, bless us to safely reach home. And we pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. So I believe everyone here knows Richard Stanford, so I'm not going to introduce him.
Yes. And you know, we're going to take a minute, the Rejebian committee is, because one of us passed away a couple of days ago. She was over 100, and Georgette McGarrah always came to this. Georgette loved this. And the reason I bring this up is because you would know Georgette if you saw her. but she never talked about what she did, and so I thought it'd be appropriate to at least mention what she did. She was once one of 6,000 generally young women who broke codes at Bletchley Park for Alan Turing. She and her sister worked constantly at Bletchley Park from 1939 until the end of the war, although they broke the Enigma code well before that, but they worked there the whole time. So I thought we'd just recognize one of us who you didn't know was in your midst, who helped win the war. That was a major breakthrough, breaking the German Enigma code. And so we have people among us who are very accomplished, and we want to remember them when they pass away and what they did for us. She helped win the war. So anyway, that said, I want to introduce Nancy Ashley, as if anybody doesn't know Nancy Ashley. You've been reviewing a long time, a very popular reviewer. Her husband, Bill, is with her. Bill is a retired international, flew airlines internationally. They have 2 daughters, both grown children of their own down in Austin. And we know Nancy certainly as an expositor of the great Southern literary figures, you know, the Tennessee Williamses and the Faulkners and the Eudora Weltys. But you know she does so much more than that. In recent years, she's been amongst the generally biography that you do most of all, she's been doing a lot of 19th century figures that had very interesting lives and left very interesting legacies and things behind. She's in that sweet spot tonight with Frederick Law Olmsted and Genius of Place. But I do want to say one thing about Nancy, because those of you who, like me, have traveled with her in travel groups, her intellectual curiosity, if she's close to a museum or a cultural place and it's about to close, if it's an hour before it closes, she'll find an Uber, she'll get over there. She's just relentless on things cultural, and I think Nancy is like most of our reviewers. They're intellectually curious. That's why I would guess that's why you do what you do, and so we're really lucky. They bring us entertainment, they bring us information, but they also remind us to be intellectually curious all through our lives, and that's a gift. So having said that, please welcome Nancy Ashley.
Okay, thank you.
Come up with
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, good night. Our book, Genius of Place, Frederick Law Olmsted, is the most wonderful story. This year is his bicentennial. He was born in 1820, but when I've learned about him and I've reviewed his life, nothing about him seems old. He was always learning. He was a wonderful personality, but he had tragedies that set him back, and he had triumphs that took a long time. And when he was young, nobody ever would have said he was a genius. So I'm going to go back and tell you about his family and his work, and he is the great park maker. As our nation went urban and people were crowded in cities, he had a vision for recreational places. When people couldn't go on vacation, they could go to his fabulous parks. In the winter, they could ice skate. In the summer, they could play ball. They could walk in beautiful vistas. In Central Park alone, he planted 3,000 or 4,000 trees to separate the park from the busy city life. He made the traffic go under the park so that they could close the park and have safety hours. So I'm going to tell you all about his life, something about his family, and his work. And he left a great legacy. This is his father, John Olmsted, who came over from England. And in the 1600s, myriads of Olmsteds moved to this new land, America. And so he, as a very young man, in 1810, began his import of silk and wool. He did not marry till he was 30 years old in 1820 or so, and his firstborn son, he had a wife he adored, and their firstborn son was Frederick Law Olmsted. 4 years later, she had little John. The Second Great Awakening was happening up and down the eastern seaboard. In the 1700s, they had the Great Awakening that brought a lot of these new people in America to the Lord, to Christ. Not 100 years later, but several years later in the 1800s, they had the Second Great Awakening and encouraged all these churches to plant churches in Africa. And we were in Hawaii years ago, and there's a great big church there that the church from Boston planted in Hawaii. So it was a missionary effort in the Second Great Awakening. Well, in all the fervor of this, Frederick Law Olmsted's mother had a new baby, 6 months old. So we don't know if she was taking laudanum, this opiate, to get over her postpartum depression, or if she was having spiritual issues with this Great Awakening going on, and I don't know what her problem was, but she died of an overdose of an opiate. She was the love of her husband's life, but he had this enormous business. He was a silk and import merchant, had a big, big business, was very, very prosperous, had not had much education himself. But within a year, he needed somebody to take care of these two little boys, so he married one of his wife's friends. Not to say it was the hottest relationship on the planet, but he married her. But when she started having her 6 children with him, she wanted these 2 little firstborn boys out of the house. So he put little Frederick in a kindergarten school with the lady out of the house. He is going to be out. He's never going to have a mother. And so he's in this little kindergarten school for 2 years till that lady had some unfortunate thing and died. Then he put him in the home of a minister because this stepmother was really into Christian education. She didn't want this kid in her house, but she wants somebody to give him a Christian education. So he goes and lives at this pastor's house, and the pastor just needed some money from the tuition. You know, he just needed people to come and pay him some tuition. So he had a 19-year-old tutor who was supposed to help the little boys learn their reading, writing, and arithmetic. But little Frederick was such a nature lover, he just wasn't interested in learning anything like reading, writing, and arithmetic. He liked throwing rocks in the creek. He liked being outside in nature. He liked playing ball. He liked fishing. And so after 2 years with this first minister, the father thinks, you know, I'm not sure my boy is getting what he needs. Now, here is the top left is the partner, Calvert Vaux, V-A-U-X, that is going to be the partner building with Frederick Law Olmsted. And then in the bottom left is a young Frederick Law Olmsted, and this is the way in the right is the way he looks as an older man. So I'm showing you some of the family before we get into the rest of the story. This is Olmsted's younger brother, John. John was 6 months old when his mother died, and Frederick was 4. Frederick only had 2 memories of his mother. At 3 years old, he remembered playing at her feet in a picnic in a park and having a wonderful, secure feeling with a very loving mother. And the little 6-month-old never knew his mother. So I'm showing you these family pictures before we go too far. But when John grew up, all the way through, he was in pastors' homes too, but he learned his reading, writing, and arithmetic, and they lived in Hartford, Connecticut. So he went to Yale and graduated. And so the 2 brothers were each other's best friend. Now, this lady is the wife of both of them. Her parents died, and her very prosperous grandparents gave her travel, education, musical training. She was this close-up picture of her and her picture there. But Frederick Olmsted had dated her a time or 2 before his younger brother married her, and he said she's good for a conversation, but you know she's nothing light my fire. So anyway, John marries her. They have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 6-month-old. When John has had tuberculosis since college days and suffered with tuberculosis. And so he's going to have an untimely death at age 32. And so he was over in the French Riviera when he was dying with tuberculosis, and the father and Frederick got over there before he died, and John said, "Don't ever let my Mary suffer." Hold that thought, because he's going to end up marrying her. Because you see, Frederick couldn't get anybody to even date him, because as he grew up, he is a man of many different trades, and the accumulation of what he knows from all his many experiences is going to be the thing that makes the genius. First of all, by the time he went to that first little kindergarten, that lady died. Then he got put in the preacher's thing, and that didn't work out. So after 2 years, his father took him and put him with his Olmsted grandparents in Connecticut, where he, for 2 years, now he's getting to be 8 and 10 years old, and he goes from cousin to aunt to uncle to grandparents, and he just flits around among all the Olmsteds, and he's still not preparing reading, writing, and arithmetic at any level at all. So the father then says, "We've got to get you into a more disciplined learning situation." So he puts him with another pastor because he still wants that Christian education. By the way, this Christian education without any mother's love is going to end up making him an agnostic. He just can't get into the faith. And so he's going to compensate by working himself to death throughout his life, because work is the most fulfilling thing he does. And every time he works so hard, he has a collapse. So he's got little physical exhaustion collapses all throughout his life because he overworks. Well, here's Mary, and well, we got to get him grown up, but I'll just hold that thought, because Mary's going to be important. He's going to end up marrying her and having several children with her. Now, this is Mary's oldest son, John Charles, at the top left, and then after he marries Mary, this is their daughter together, Marion, and after John Charles, the top left, he had a daughter, Charlotte, and a son, Owen. Charlotte, as she grows up, completely loses her mind, and they have to put her in an institution, which is traumatic. Owen has tuberculosis like his father, and he went out to Wyoming to do hard, like Teddy Roosevelt went to West to beef up his frail respiratory, and he died at 19. So the 2 of the 3 children of his brother died. In 1860, he had a little boy that was 3 months old in a carriage, and by this time, Olmsted is building Central Park. He got married 2 years after his brother died to the widow, and he got married in 1857 in June. In August, he had a complete nervous breakdown. And so the people that he was working for building Central Park said, "Go up to Saratoga Springs for 2 weeks and get yourself together." Well, he came back still depleted. Then they gave him $500 and said, "Go back to England where you're a total celebrity, and we'll let you rest." Well, he went to England, and he stayed September, October, November, December. He was a celebrity in London because he had gotten his ideas for building Central Park from an earlier visit when he was with his brother John traveling over there, and he went to Liverpool, and Berkhamsted Park was like, it was a great public park for the working man, and it was so exciting to Olmsted to see that you could have this enormous ice skating pond, and ball fields where they played croquet or whatever they played in England, and all the things, the recreational. It was a vacation spot for working people, and so hold that thought, because that is what he based Central Park on, and a lot of other parks that he built. Now, this middle picture is his son, late in life son. When he's 51 years old, he has this little boy, because his firstborn son got thrown out of the carriage when they were riding through Central Park, because he married, and he married in 1857, as he had 2 years. He had 3,000 employees trying to build Central Park. It was a huge job, and he's got this wife and 3 children that have come into his life. So he goes to sleep in his carriage going through the park in 1860, throws the wife and the 3-month-old out. The baby, they hit a rock. He breaks his left femur, and 2.5 weeks later, he goes back to work, and his left leg heals 2 inches shorter than his right leg. So the rest of his life, he's on a cane, but he's just beginning the successful part of his life. Let me tell you, so that's John Charles is his stepson. He and the son are gonna continue the Olmsted park building, they're landscape architects. He coined the phrase landscape architect because he wasn't just a landscape gardener. He had a partner that was an architect, and they built the structures and the bridges and all the structures that go into this amazing park. So these are his 3 children that ended up living. And Marion was born, the daughter here, was born in 1860, just before the Civil War. And then when he was 51, he had this other little boy. And in between that, they had a little stillborn son. So he lost four children. But this little guy, this grown-up, this nice-looking man in the middle, he called him Henry Perkins. See, her name was Mary Perkins. So he named this child Henry Perkins. And then when he was 7 years old, he saw that he was going to live. And so he named him Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. And he's going to go to Harvard. And he's going to graduate from Harvard right in the middle of when Olmsted is finishing the Biltmore House in Asheville, North Carolina. And when John Singer Sargent was painting the picture of Olmsted and Richard Morris Hunt, the architect of the Biltmore House, he painted the face of Olmsted. And then Olmsted, by this time, is getting to be 79, 80 years old, and he's getting addled. So the portrait of Frederick Law of Olmsted at the Biltmore House, the son, the 19-year-old to 22-year-old son, put his clothes on, and so from his neck down, that's the son, and his father, to make the portrait. Because John Singer Sargent was up at the Biltmore House for a month, and he painted Richard Morris Hunt, the architect, and Frederick Law Olmsted. So those are his children. And in year 2000, we had a 33-cent stamp with Frederick Law Olmsted on it. And this didn't last because in 2001, they raised the postage to 34 cents. And this is Olmsted as he is going to be in charge of the United States Sanitary Commission in 1860 for the Civil War. But I've got to take you back now and show you how long it took him to grow up. He is 30 years old. Is he 39 years old before he gets to the landscape architect? When he was 15, and you're supposed to start college at age 16 at Yale, which is right there in Hartford, he got sumac poisoning. He got into a sumac bush and he was totally blinded. So his father, in a panic, took him to New York to an eye specialist. And he said his eyes will heal. He put some ointment and things. He will get his eyesight back. But he can never do the rigors of a university experience. Well, guess what? He wasn't ready for a university experience anyway from playing all his life growing up. And so they said, his stepmother said, find something for him to do. So he trained himself to be a surveyor. Remember when George Washington lost his father and he didn't get to go to college, like at university? He learned to be a surveyor. Well, the problem with Olmsted being a surveyor is he can't see very well. And so but he's trained, and it's going to be valuable in his future to know the art of surveying to make all these things he's going to make. And then his father said, well, if you're not going to college and you can't be a surveyor, I have this import of silk and wool, and you can be an accountant in the silk and import business in New York. So they put him indoors on a stool, keeping books for the silk and wool import business. This was anathema to him. So he looked around after a while, what can I do? And he found out that there was a ship, a trading ship, going to China. This sounds like a great adventure. I think I'll be a sailor. And so he gets a buddy, and they get signed up for this ship, and they go to China. It takes 3 months to get over there. this captain is taking all kind of trinkets and things to sell and trade, and he's going to bring home a boatload of tea. Very popular in the early days. And so it takes about 3 months to get over there. The ship is overloaded. They put the 4 teenage boys on the bottom of this place, and these crusty old cursing sailors are too venomous for him to be associated with. And when they get to China, the captain makes the young boys stay on the boat all the time, loading and unloading things that he's doing, and they only get out to look around China 4 different little visits. And this is when he sees the sampans and the different architecture of the Chinese buildings. And this is when he sees little lagoons and waterways. Everything he saw in China was so exotic that he just memorized what that different culture looked like. And years later, in 1893, when he's going to build the Chicago World's Fair, he uses Lake Michigan as a backdrop and lagoons and waterways the way he saw in China. Everything he experiences in his life comes back as a rich reward to do something he wants to do. So after he went to China, he got lice all over him. He had to shave his head. He got jaundice because there was no vitamin C. He's 5'6", and he lost weight down to 100 pounds. And when he walked in the driveway at home, his father had no idea who it was. "Oh, my son, what is it?" He said, "Well, I don't want to be a sailor." And so, but he said, "I think I want to be an organic farmer." And so he sent him up to New York, and he trained with an organic farmer, and he said, "I think now what I would like to do is have a farm." And so the father is going to pay for everything until this guy is 30 years old, with every idea, every single thing he's going to do. So he bought him a farm on Staten Island. And he said, "You do all those best practices, and you grow vegetables, and you have a little farmer's market over in Manhattan, and you can make a living." And so the daddy bought him a farm, and he worked out there. And he also, if you remember this, the Vanderbilts, they were from Staten Island, and William Harrison Vanderbilt, the second generation, got Olmsted early in his life to design a cemetery for the Vanderbilts out on Staten Island. So hold that thought, because years later, the Vanderbilts, who built houses, spent all their money building houses up and down Fifth Avenue and Newport and different places. They got him to build the Biltmore House in Asheville. So he doesn't want to be a surveyor, and he doesn't want to be an accountant, and he doesn't want to be a sailor, but he's now thinking he's going to be an organic farmer. So he does that. He has 2 or 3 people working for him on this farm, has a house to live in, and then his younger brother graduates from Yale and wants to go to England for a walking tour because he's got tuberculosis, and he's just convinced that being outdoors and on a trip and having something stimulating would be healthy. And Olmsted said, "I want to go. And so the father, indulgent, see, the stepmother does not love these boys, but the father loves them and pays for them to do things that enriches their lives. Every time he went to England and France, he brought home ideas that were tried and true and beautiful. So they go to the west coast of England, and where are the Beatles from? Liverpool. They land in Liverpool. And in Liverpool is a working man's fabulous Birkenhead Gardens. And this is it's got the ice skating rink, it's got the playing fields, it's got it's got the ramble in the woods, and it just gives people a huge recreational outlet for working class people. So hold that thought, because he's going to bring those ideas back and going to enrich many of these cities. You know, America has been totally rural and agrarian, but it's getting more and more crowded with, especially New York, because in the early 1800s, they had the potato famine. Irish people came to America. The Germans have sent more immigrants to America than any other country, and there was a flood of German immigration into New York, and they were crowded into uncomfortable little apartments and tenements. So the leaders of New York said, we need to build a big public park. So someone introduced Olmsted to the organizers of clearing the land in Upper Manhattan for a park because there were pigsties up there and livestock. And I saw on the Channel 13, there was a black village, it's called Seneca Village, that has now got a designation up there that they used eminent domain to push them off the land so they could get 2.5 miles long and a half-mile wide for this park. And so they hired Olmsted at somebody's recommendation to clear the land for the park. And so before he got that job, he had the New York Daily Times, which is now the New York Times, started in the early 1850s. And this was going to be a newspaper for both sides of the political focus. And it's going to give good news and edify people with information and so on. And the first thing the editor wanted to know is about this slavery issue in the South. Because people in the North were selling slaves to the people in the South, and then they were abolitionists trying to get the people in the South to free the slaves, which bankrupted the people in the South. So we have Olmsted taking a job because in all his travels, he had enjoyed keeping journals and making stories and keeping a track of things he had learned. So he goes down the eastern seaboard and he writes a pamphlet. He writes a pamphlet about slavery. And at first, he couldn't get anybody to talk to him. The plantation owners wouldn't even talk to him. But the second or third article he sent into the Times is that he landed in a black funeral in a church. He was the only white person there. And he went into the dialect and the drama and the whole uproar of this amazing experience of this black funeral. And the people in New York had never seen or heard anything like it. They loved it, and they looked forward to it. He wrote many, many articles zooming in on one little aspect of what he saw in the slavery South. Well, that pamphlet has gone out of print. But when he came home, his brother John said, I want to go with you when you do the next side down the western side of the country, down through Tennessee and Kentucky and down to Texas. So his brother John, they load up their books, they get a horse, they hire a man to be their keeper and helper and, make meals for them. And so they go on this jaunt, and they get down to Texas and meet all the Germans. This is amazing. These people are unbelievable. They don't have slavery. They get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work until dark. Their wives are running bakeries and shops, and they've got civilization. In fact, the two brothers said, we wouldn't mind living down here with these people. And they wrote that to Mary back home, and she said, y'all come home right now. So they went back home, but that book, The Cotton Kingdom, has never been out of print. It was very influential, and they saw slavery kind of up close and not so good. He saw a supervisor of one of the plantations was showing him around when he spotted a runaway slave in the bushes, and he brought this young girl out and whipped her right in front of him. And he just thought, and he saw that this is not an efficient way for people to live. I mean, only 30% of the people in the South ever owned slaves. And out of that 30%, very few had the magnificent mansions of the Cotton Kingdom of Natchez or Columbus, Mississippi, or Aberdeen, or some of those places that had so much wealth. Everybody did not have so much wealth. And he just said, this is inefficient, it's not the best, it's not gonna work for everybody. So let's go. So anyway, we get him to this place in the early 1850s where he's doing journalism, and he loves it. He really has a keen sensitivity. He has an ability to motivate people to explain things and do things. He can delegate amazingly because people like him, and he's got great personality. So anyway, he comes after he writes The Cotton Kingdom. He finds out that they are crowded with all these Irish and German immigrants, and the way the Dutch laid out New York, they're going this way and they're going that way, and there's not much land for recreation. So they designate this big space in the upper part of Manhattan for the Central Park. And so they hired him to clean up the land to get ready to build the park. And he was now, when he came back from his travels, he bought Putnam's weekly magazine in 1853. And there was a panic of 1853, and before he had been owner of this magazine for 6 months, it went bankrupt, and he lost every cent. And his daddy had finally said, "You have got to pay me back because I've been paying for your life all these 35 years, and it would be good for you to make a go of it and pay me back." So he's now in debt. And that's when they said, "Why don't you take over getting the park ready to be built here? You know how you can clean up this land." So he gets out there, and he knows he can organize and motivate people. So he cleaned up the pig farms, the smelly places, and this place where the ice skating rink was a big sinkhole, and so he just made that bigger so it would be a great big ice skating pond, and they could fish in it in the summertime. And so Calvert Vaux is this little guy. Let's see, where's Calvert Vaux? I showed you him back here. Yeah. That guy on the top left, 4'10". He's from England. He's educated at the School of Fine Arts in Paris. And so he comes to Olmsted, and he says, I'm going too far. I don't know how to go back. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to get him here. Calvert Vaux came to him and said, they are paying $2,500 to whoever, they're having a competition to plan Central Park. So and this is an incentive because he now is in debt to his father. And they paid him $2,000 to clear the land so that they could build a park. So Calvert Vaux and he submit their submission, and they measured the park. They said he figured out a way to go underground so they can close the park from 10 at night till 6 in the morning, and the traffic in upper Manhattan can go underneath the park. They had all these designs so that the wide walkway that goes in a half a mile goes diagonal, so it seems more, and they planted 3,300 or 4,000 trees. I mean, they had to wait 10 years to see what that was going to look like. But anyway, they made this detailed plan and won the competition over 33 other entries. And Calvert Vaux was a trained architect. All he wanted to do was build the 33 bow bridges and make the little houses and places to locate, and make it beautiful architecturally. He was an architect. Olmsted wanted to make it recreational opportunities for all these people that never get to go on vacation that are packed into a city. So he wanted it to be beautiful and useful and recreational, and he was so thoughtful in every way to make that happen. So they get to building the park, and it's 1857, and they're supposed to get it done in a couple of years. So he's got 3,000 people. He's got everything organized with leaders in every different aspect, some doing drainage, some doing this, bringing in dirt, planting trees, the whole thing. And he gets word that his brother, 1857, is in France on the Riviera dying. So he and his father rush over there, and his brother dies and is buried in France. The wife has a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-month-old. She comes home and lives on Staten Island in the family farm. Well, after one winter out there in isolation, this is not it. So she moves up to Upper Manhattan. Now, Vaux and Olmsted are living in a little situation up there, and she rents a house nearby. And in 1859, he marries her. If he's going to take care of her, he's going to marry her. So they get married in June of 1859. He's got the details of finishing this park before him, thousands of people working for him. In June, he married her. In August, he had a total nervous breakdown. And this is when they sent him up to Saratoga Springs for a vacation, came home, and then they gave him $500 and said, go to London and Paris and have yourself a vacation and come home well. While he's gone, he is a celebrity in London. They wine and dine and entertain him, and they're thrilled with the way they've influenced him to build something fabulous in America. So he stays over there until December. He stays over there 4 months and gets pretty well. But what happened when he was gone is that the people running the park, and they had designated $1.4 million to completely build Central Park. He had already spent $8 million. And so he is in deep trouble when he comes home, and they said, before you do anything, you've got to come before the committee and ask for funds. And this is not going to work for him. So he's looking for ways to get out of this, and it's late 1860, and in 1861 at Fort Sumter, they began the Civil War. So he quits the park committee, and he goes, that first battle at Manassas in Washington, D.C., where people sat in their chairs thinking this is going to be a single battle, this thing is going to be over soon. The poor Union Army had been marching for miles. They were exhausted, hadn't been fed properly, and they got beat in that first battle. So now we know the Civil War is not going to be over. It's going to be a while. So he, in 1860, with his wife and that first little baby boy, had been riding through the park and hit the bricks and broke his leg. He's crippled, so he can't sign up to be a soldier. So he sees a need after that first battle. They need the United States Sanitary Commission. And this is who he is right here. He's the head of the United States Sanitary Commission, and this is the USSC. And he had the idea, when Ezra went back to build the temple in Jerusalem, he and Nehemiah organized the people, so the people that are going to build the wall are going to live right in front of the wall. So he said, the people who are from your hometown, we want the Women's Aid Society to knit socks and make shirts and do everything to supply the soldiers. So he did this incredible organization for the Civil War. He put doctors strategically up and down the East Coast and down the western region and through the middle. He got railroads to take food, lemons, everything nutritious for the soldiers, because the railroads were running then. And so he did an incredible job of organizing food and medicine for the Union Army from 1861 till 1863. But after the Battle of Vicksburg and the Battle of Gettysburg were Union victories, he said, this war is going to be won by the Union, and I'm not going to have an income. So he quit the United States Sanitary Commission, and he found out that there was a gold mine in California that John C. Fremont was leaving, and it was up for sale. And so this organization behind the gold mine gave him $10,000 to go out there and take over. Well, he goes out there by himself, but then Mary, who's got 4 children now, her 3 and little Marion, who was born in 1860, we want to come. So they get on a train. I don't think they could ride a train. I don't know how they got there, maybe around the coast somehow. But they go out there, and there's no place for them to live. So he puts them in a living situation over a grocery store that he finagled to get. But what he realized is this mine is not going to ever produce gold because it is completely depleted, caved in, worn out, and there's no funding to start. See, the gold is all up and down California, but it takes a lot of money to start over in a new place. So he goes across the state to San Francisco, and he gets to know people, and the people realize what a great guy he is in landscaping and all. They want to save Yosemite. They want to make it a California state park. So they hire him to be chairman of the committee, and he gets interested and does that, and gets Yosemite made into a California state park. But there's not much else happening. And, his wife and 4 children out there with a tutor, and they're just having a little adventure. But by 2 years of not much happening in California, he gets a letter from Calvert Vaux, his old buddy, the architect that built Central Park. Come home, because they want us to build Prospect Park over in Brooklyn. And now Brooklyn's just across the water from Manhattan. So he goes home, and now the beginning is here. These are pictures of Central Park. In this book, this publication, The Nation, was in 1865. It had been a pro-union, not a anti-slavery thing. And now, since they had the 13th Amendment freeing slaves, they make this progressive magazine that is the oldest political magazine in America. Started in 1860, I think. I don't know. But anyway, The Nation promoted Bernie Sanders, so it's always been a progressive kind of thing. But there's Central Park. You see all the trees. It took years to grow and all the different aspects of the park. It's a long rectangular park. And then he goes over to, and that's part of Central Park again, where they have people just pouring in there to enjoy being outdoors. But this is Prospect Park. And remember that Calvert Vaux was an architect, and he built all these edifices and bridges and things that were to his liking. And Prospect Park was very, very popular among all the people in Brooklyn. And so the next thing comes up, the people in Buffalo, New York, we want a park. I mean, we want a park, and we want it right now. So the Olmsted Parks Conservancy in Buffalo the park system was, the guy who built the park in Buffalo was a nephew of L'Enfant, who had planned Washington, D.C. L'Enfant and his nephew or somebody, the way they made the Capitol, the centerpiece of Washington, D.C., with all the streets going as spokes, north, south, east, and west, off of that system of having a centerpiece in the spokes. And I was in Washington, D.C. one time, and I wanted to go northwest to get on a bus for a tour, and this driver took me northeast or somewhere, and I said, this doesn't look like any tourist kind of place. This looks like something I don't need. And so I realized that there's this French way of designing cities on a spoke with all that I was not familiar with. But this Buffalo, New York Park Conservancy got carried away with their that's Boston. The Buffalo parks had all these beautiful, and it's 3/4 as big as Central Park, but it got very exquisite planning and just enriches the people that live there so much. And then in Boston, by this time he gets to be 60 years old, he actually moves to Boston. He had moved from, when he came back to the States after the California thing, he moved to downtown New York, and in 1871, he had bought a 3-story place in Manhattan because he wanted a place for his father and that stepmother to come live with him if they ever needed to or wanted to, but his father died. His father had his father fell, broke his hip, and died age 81. So the stepmother was astonished that through the years, as the father had been so generous to his 2 firstborn sons, that there wasn't that much money left. She got her house and a little stipend, and there were enough stocks and income from stocks to give the boys and her children $15,000 a year. So Olmsted now knows he is not going to retire. He is going to work for the end of time. And so this is why, this begins the richest part of his traveling life. But when he turned 60, he moved from New York to Boston, and the Boston Conservancy hired him and gave him a 3-year contract to build the Emerald Necklace Parks. The first thing they asked him to do was to clean up this Back Bay fens that had been like a sewer. It had been just nasty, nasty, and they wanted him to clean it up and make something grow there like the Everglades or something. So somehow he cleaned up that Back Bay nasty fens, and and you know, Fenway Park is the takeoff on all that, fens and all that. So anyway, he made this beautiful that's different from a park, the fence, but that's the first project in Boston. And then over a 3-year period, there was a river running through Boston, and he from Buffalo, they coined the phrase parkway. A parkway is kind of a street that is a continuum, and in Buffalo, no, it's not Buffalo, but in Boston, they have this river going through, and they have parks, and then they put Franklin Park was a big park that had the ice skating rink and the playing fields and so on. It's the big part of the park, but the necklace was along the river parkway, making beautiful picnic places and so on all throughout the city of Boston. So that was, everywhere he went, there was a little new twist to what he could do and what he did do. But Boston came after Buffalo, and that was a great success. And in Boston, he was a celebrity, and he settled in the neighborhood, one of the oldest neighborhoods in the country, Brookline. And he got a fairly modest house there, but he gave it a great name, Fairhaven or something. And he settled into Boston, but his projects now were all over the country. So he is on the railroad going far and wide. After Boston, he in 1891, he met Leland Stanford. Leland Stanford had one son, and I think the son, I don't know, did not get accepted to Harvard, didn't get accepted to Yale. So Leland Stanford, who had been a big railroad man, he had driven the Golden Spike when the East and West met in Utah or so on with his railroad, and he was a multimillionaire. And so he traveled the world, but his son died of typhoid fever. And so he went ahead to build this Stanford University, and so he came to the East, and he got the best biology, the best history, the best English, the best of every discipline to come to Stanford, and he paid them more money than they could earn anywhere else. And he was at MIT trying to persuade the president of MIT to come be the president of his new Stanford University. The MIT guy said, not interested. But you need to meet my buddy, Frederick Law Olmsted, who could design you a gorgeous campus. So now Frederick Law Olmsted, who's in business, this is Leland Stanford on the right up there and Olmsted on the left. And so he goes out there, he studies for a year what will grow in California desert, because not much. And so he draws up a plan, and he knows how hot it is out there. So he gives this, but he connects his buildings with a sheltered thing so people could walk to classes in the shade. And he designs the beautiful building, and he plants the palm trees to drive up to it. But Leland Stanford and his wife are traveling the world, and they will come home from Italy and say, we want something like they saw in Italy, or we want something like we saw in Turkey. And Olmsted's saying, you confuse me with someone who cares about all your changes because I'm busy. He's got 20 projects going all the time across the nation, and he lives in Boston, and he's in a railroad going somewhere all the time. So after he took his $10,000, he laid out a plan for Stanford University, but he is now working on the World's Fair in Chicago. They were going to call it the Columbian Exposition in 1892, 400 years after Columbus discovered America. Only problem is they were late getting started. They told Olmsted to figure out where this great World's Fair is going to be in Chicago, where they kill pigs and cows. It smells bad, it's flat, it is not scenic. And so he said the only thing pretty up here is Lake Michigan. And so they go and they say, we're going to do Lake Michigan. And then he remembered all those lagoons and all those funny little boats and things we saw way back in China, remember? And so he starts saying, we're going to build this World's Fair with the backdrop of the beautiful water, and we're going to build, and he gets 4 or 5 different architects to make these papier-mâché big exhibit halls, and only the Field and Science Museum is a leftover from that 1893 World's Fair. And so he's working on the Chicago World's Fair. He's going from 1890 to 1895. He's hired by George Washington Vanderbilt, the youngest of 8 children of the second generation of Vanderbilts. And this young Vanderbilt never had anything to do with railroads. He was never in the business, but as the 8th child of William Henry Vanderbilt, he inherited $13 million. And he had taken his mother on a 24-hour train ride from New York to Asheville, North Carolina a couple of times because she had malaria. And so he saw the beauty of Western North Carolina. And he immediately, on his first trip, bought the view that has Mount Pisgah it would go right out his bedroom window, the highest point in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So he gets all these people to start buying property until he owns 125,000 acres. He owns 4 counties in North Carolina. And he hires Richard Morris Hunt to be an architect. Richard Morris Hunt takes him and Richard Morris Hunt and his wife take young George Vanderbilt to the Loire Valley in France to show him palaces, palaces, palaces. And they pick out 3 palaces that they combine into the making of the Biltmore House. So Richard Morris Hunt gets limestone from railroaded right up to the building place, and they tear that railroad up after the house is built. But they hire Olmsted to landscape 125,000 acres. And he said, that is not what you want to do. And a lot of this land, the timber had been clear cut and it was eroding. They hadn't replanted forest. And so young George Vanderbilt said, I've got a friend, Gifford Pinchot, that I went to college with, and he's been over to Germany studying forestry. And what you do in these smaller European countries is you harvest the timber every 25 years and replant it, and you've got an industry. Well, making money with farming, they at one time had garden seeds and stuff. They had all different kind of industrial ideas, money-making ideas, because the Biltmore farming was going to be self-sustaining. So he liked the idea of forestry being profitable. So they hired Gifford Pinchot, and then they hired this horticulturist at the Biltmore House called Chauncey Beadle, 19 years old, and he's going to end up being the superintendent of the Biltmore House, and he's going to be an employee at the Biltmore House for 60 years. And before he died, he had about, I don't know how many, 300 or 400 varieties of azaleas that he had collected from around the world that he donated to the Biltmore House. And George Washington Vanderbilt's wife found a place to plant all those azaleas. Plus, they lined the 2.5 or 3 mile driveway with azaleas and rhododendrons. So something beautiful is blooming when you drive to the Biltmore House. So this is, what does that say? Oh, that's the World's Fair. Yeah. Chicago. I don't know about that. Well, here's the Biltmore House, and it is gorgeous. And when I graduated from high school, my aunt and uncle lived in Asheville, so I went up there, and my aunt has been to the Biltmore House many times, so she took me there and left me there all day long. So I have so enjoyed being there and have been back 2 or 3 times since, and they used to have a fabulous dairy there where you get the best ice cream, but now it's a winery. And now when the grandchildren took over, they built a hotel. So you're a hotel, and then they've got another hotel. So now they've got carriage rides throughout the whole thing. Well, George Washington Vanderbilt died age 51, and they had 1 daughter, and she was a teenager, but she was going to inherit the Biltmore House at age 21. So the widow stayed there for 10 years, took care of all the employees and everything, and then the wife married a guy, Cecil, from England, an aristocrat, and they had 2 little boys. But during the Depression, she had to open the Biltmore House for tours, and she didn't like that. So she divorced Cecil, left the Biltmore House to him, took her 6- and 8-year-old boys to England, but the will says you have to send them to Harvard when they're 18. So they came back home, but they didn't inherit the Biltmore House till they were 35, I think 21, 31. They were later, 10 more years. So they graduated from Harvard and worked in finance in New York, and then they came and inherited the Biltmore house as 30-something-year-olds. And then their two children are, and one brother ran the property and the other brother ran the house. And now their children are running it. And then it's just been in the family as a private thing all through these many years, to the glory of our nation, really. It's fabulous. Well, at the end of the road, the best thing that Frederick Law Olmsted enjoyed was that project at the Biltmore House and the World's Fair in Chicago. But as he was doing, they brought John Singer Sargent in to paint an 8-foot portrait of each of Richard Morris Hunt and of Frederick Law Olmsted. And as I said, Frederick Law Olmsted, they painted his face, and then they put his college graduate son in his clothes and let him finish making the picture. And then little Frederick Law Jr. dropped Jr. from his name, and he and his cousin John Charles was always the draftsman. He was the stepson who could do all the drawings for what the project would be. So they worked together till John Charles died in the late 20s. But then the Jr., Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., dropped Jr. from his name, but he retired in like 1949 and lived about 8 or 10 more years. So we have Frederick Law Olmsted making parks. In Audubon Park in New Orleans has the big gated entrance, and it's got the zoo in the back with the big, it's got all the structures of Olmsted Park with the architecture and the beauty of they've got a golf course and a winding path around it with the zoo in the back. So it's an Audubon Park. It's a Olmsted design park, which has made America beautiful and has made me a grateful person, because we love beautiful, beautiful parks. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. As usual, I love your spirit of adventure. Now, next week is David McCluskey. If you saw the Dallas magazine a while back, and I think it was Dallas, that had At Home with the McCluskeys, David and his family were featured recently. He served in the CIA in Syria, and he's written a novel called Damascus Station that's been nationally very well received. He's a great speaker. We're going to have books afterwards. They'll be $20 a piece. I'll just be taking cash or check if you want one after you've heard him, and he'll personalize it as Dave Lieber did last week. And so I will tell you, because I've heard him, he is a great speaker. Get ready for a lot of fun. CIA, Syria, from a guy who was there. And I think he's going to take some questions. He may leave 10 minutes or so for questions afterwards if you have questions. So see you next week for David McCluskey and Damascus Station.